Welcome everybody to the December 23rd, 2019 meeting for Van Wert City Council. We'll begin with the invocation by Pastor Keith Stoller, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would please rise.
Heavenly Father, we are so thankful this evening to be able to come to this last council meeting of our calendar year. Thankful, God, that on the cusp of Christmas, even here we can celebrate your birth, the great gift of your Son, who brought redemption to every man, woman, boy, and girl who will trust you. So we're thankful, God, for that great grace which you've showed to all of us. Thankful, God, for the call to public service to each of those who have served faithfully through this year. We pray especially, God, your blessing upon our mayor, on Mr. Steve and Mr. Warren as they move on to a new chapter in their lives. We pray, Lord, for your wisdom and blessing upon them. Lord, this evening as the city's business is done, we pray again for wisdom, understanding, for compassion, and that care would be taken, that decisions made would honor you and serve our public well. We thank you again for our Lord Jesus, and in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor. Veronica, please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Here.
Mr. Fenton? Mrs. Murgy? Mr. Straley?
Here.
Mr. Marshall?
Here.
Mr. Egler?
Here.
Mr. Tucci?
Here.
Okay, Mrs. Murgy and Mr. Penton are not here. I need a motion to excuse them.
I'll make that motion.
Warren first, Mr. Egler second.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Tucci?
Yes.
All right, everybody was presented the agenda for this evening's meeting. Are there any additions or corrections?
Move to accept.
Move to accept the agenda by Mr. Tritchew. Do I have a second? A second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Tucci?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
All right, also before this evening, everybody was presented the minutes from our previous meeting dated December 9th, 2019. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes?
Move to accept as submitted.
Okay, move to accept by Mr. Tritchew. Second. Second by Mr. Straley. Please call the roll.
Mr. Tucci?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
All right. Comments, communications. I have several. Received an email forwarded to me from American Legal indicating an estimate for our codification charges. I compared this to the budget that you had sent out, Martha. He estimates $6,000 around. We had budgeted $7,300. So if you want to, I mean, you're more than welcome to make that change, or depending on if you want to move that money.
Well,
around.
after the first of the year, I'll be asking for
Permanent.
changes to the permanent, yeah.
Okay, so I can make that note then. All right, also, I was emailed, received an email from Chief Jones. We are required, Jay, are you familiar with this? We are required to create a board to address reserve firefighters, the Volunteer Firefighters Dependents Fund. The legislative authority, which is the city council, needs to elect 2 members for the board. Are you familiar?
No.
No? Okay,
It's new, it's new.
Is
It's
it new?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
new.
The chief asked that his recommendation would be the council president and finance chair, in addition to himself and one of his senior captains. So what I'll do is I will hold this until after the year, when we have the new council installed. That's all the communications that I have. Are there any communications from council? From the public? Okay, going to the agenda specifically, Mr. Mitch Price is here from Valiant Main Street. Go ahead, Mitch, you have the floor.
Good evening, everybody. Just wanted to give a quick recap. Sorry I wasn't here last meeting. Me and my wife had a baby 14 days ago.
You're not excuses that.
So she came 3.5 weeks early. So
Congratulations.
we're home. So adjusting to a little bit. So 3 a.m. diaper duty that got me a little tired. So it's been a great year. I can't express my thanks towards everybody in this room that makes Main Street go. Just some stats here. We had about 3,000 volunteer hours this year. That comes to about $67,000 worth of volunteer hours. We had 101 board meetings. I've been to probably 99 of those. About $7,000 worth of in-kind donation, service, and support. We also had 13 events and then partnered up with 2 other organizations. So it's been a great year. There's a lot of movement going downtown. All of our events exceeded our budget, exceeded our volunteers, exceeded the attendance of it. So we evaluate our events every year. We're going to keep what we did last year and keep it going 2020. And then after that, you'll probably see a couple changes from the events. So with the money that you guys gave us, we did purchase the phase 1 of the speaker system. I got it 2 days before we went into the hospital, so I fooled around with it a little bit, but we're looking at some additional funding from a couple other people to get it off the ground. To do the whole downtown, it costs about $23,000 or $24,000. The nice thing about this is we can piece it together. It's a wireless system. It's based out of Atlanta. It's pretty new. It's only 6 years old. It's for all the main streets. I saw it at a Seattle conference when I went in. This guy named Mike Hoover. It's called Aeronomics, and it's a really great system. That way we can use it for not only for our events, but for disasters, or if we have something emergencies downtown. I talked to Rick McCoy, kind of introduced him to it. He thinks it's a great system. So talked to Bill Lawson. We'll get that up as soon as the weather breaks. I don't want anybody up there. It is 50
It was 50
degrees
today,
but,
50 degrees
I
today.
didn't expect that, but we will put that up, and the goal is to have it at least up for the Peony Parade. So I want to thank you guys for the extra, $5,000 that you gave us. Hopefully you'll continue to do that. That way we can just keep adding on to it. The goal is to get the whole project wrapped up by the end of 2020. That's what our goal is. I've got a couple requests in for some hefty donations from other people as well. So that would be great if we can get that again, and it really helps our organization. We had our accreditation last Wednesday. Francis Jo came from Heritage, Ohio. We hit 9 out of 10. Really doing really well. She doesn't seem, I think Jerry was there for a little bit, Steve was there. She seems that we're on the right path, and excited about the future, and she just raved about how our downtown looks from 5 years ago. So I appreciate all the stuff the city does. I would like to thank Jerry for being on the board, and Steve being on the board. They're going off, and appreciate you guys supporting Main Street and supporting me, and being at the meetings and really digging in. And so that's the beauty of this board. It's probably the best working board in Valiant County, and we really put a lot of, we grind it out, and we have some great momentum. So thanks for being on the board and the committees as well. Like to thank Jay and the city and Martha for always helping me out when I've emailed them or called them, and Bill Lawson and Josh Stettler have been great. So great teamwork. We're excited. We're partnering up with CVB for Harvest Moon and Town Creek Live for Wassenberg. We're trying to get it where everybody's doing one event instead of several events. We feel like we're going in the right direction with that, but that couldn't be done without everybody in this room, and I really appreciate it. And I love what I do, and I'm not just saying that, so I love every day, I love going in, yes.
No, I have a question,
Oh,
once
sure.
you're finished.
I love going in every day, I feel like I'm making an impact, and I feel like, we have some great momentum, so I think in 2 or 3 years, the downtown's gonna maybe have a facelift, a little bit, there's some buildings that have gotten moved, but, I don't know the whole, how that's gonna look, but we're excited for the ride and can't wait for the future. So thanks, everybody for, what you've done for us, not only financially, but volunteer as well. Yes.
As of the when's your first board meeting in 2020?
We will go the third, it's always the third Wednesday, so it'll be the 15th, I believe,
Okay, and those are in the mornings,
8 a.m., yep.
8 a.m.,
Yep.
okay. Because our incoming mayor will,
Yep.
will be on that board, but then a council member, but I have to find somebody that's available at 8 a.m.
Yeah,
on
yeah.
Wednesdays.
So, and I have a board packet for Ken, or binder I'll get with you, but before that meeting, that way you can go through all the
So-
bylaws and all that fun stuff.
We, everybody gets sworn in, all new council and the mayor, new mayor, gets sworn in on the 13th,
Okay.
13th of 2020.
Just
So I'll let you
Yeah,
know,
let me know, or let Chet know.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
any questions as far as Main Street from anybody else I can take, or did I steal your, or is that your,
That-
did I ask, or did I?
No, that was the only, you can steal anything you need to.
Yeah.
Mitch.
But no, in all scenarios, we are excited about the future, so, I'm looking forward to just, we set goals, so we set attainable goals, but we also wanna push ourselves too. So, we feel like we're hardworking people, not only on the board, but the whole city. I mean, I love Van Wert, or else I would not live here, so, and raised now 3 kids, not just 2, so.
Yeah.
My newborn doesn't know, but she'll love Van Wert as well. Any other questions?
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Mitch.
Thanks for the time, appreciate it.
Okay, next on the agenda, Mr. Chris Wilson.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening.
Sure.
My name is Chris Wilson. With me is my wife Jody Wilson. We reside at 503 North Market Street. Through our business, we own property located at 227 North Market Street. At the November 25th meeting of Everett City Council, a motion was passed requiring Haven of Hope to apply for a zoning variance to operate a men's homeless shelter at 233 North Market Street. This hearing would allow neighborhood residents and property owners to ask questions and express their concerns in a neutral forum. On December 4th, the Zoning Board of Appeals notified adjacent property owners that instead of complying with City Council's directive, Haven of Hope had filed an appeal regarding the City Council's decision, and that a hearing would be held on January 9th, 2020 to address the issue. On December 18th, sorry for me to say it for some reason, the Zoning Board of Appeals notified adjacent property owners that the appeal had been withdrawn and the issue would not be addressed at the January 9th meeting. As of today, Haven of Hope has not made any further filings with City Council or the Zoning Board of Appeals. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding in the community as to exactly what Haven of Hope is attempting to establish. I've tried unsuccessfully to reach out to the Haven of Hope board to gather as much information as I could. So the only information I have is based on newspaper articles and Haven of Hope's social media postings. The project at 233 North Market is for a men's homeless shelter that will offer overnight accommodations for up to 10 men. Intake is from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Clients must leave the facility by 8 a.m. This is not a residency program like those offered by Crisis Care or the YWCA. Haven of Hope will refuse services to people who look or act intoxicated, but this will be at the discretion of the intake staff. After the intake process, there will be no on-site supervision. Apparently, the facility will be monitored using a cell phone. Their social media page addresses what will happen if someone leaves the facility after hours. The answer is, quote, The shelter will have a loud local alarm that will sound if someone gets out either door after hours. That will also be tied to a monitoring system and will be loud enough for the sheriff department to hear it. There's no mention of any policies or procedures to ensure the safety of the staff, clients, or neighbors. During my research, I found many examples of laws and guidelines regarding homeless shelters. Safety and security are of paramount importance. In all instances, qualified personnel must be present anytime the shelter is in operation. The Ohio Development Services Agency has excellent resources for the establishment and operation of homeless shelters. The office also provides grant money funding for this purpose. At a recent local service club presentation, the Haven of Hope executive director was asked if they participated in the grant program. His reply was no, because the requirements were too restrictive. It appears that Haven of Hope has chosen to ignore established guidelines for the operation of homeless shelters, as well as City Council's directive to seek a zoning variance. Further, there continues to be activity at the location, and Haven of Hope is actively recruiting volunteers for the shelter. At this time, we request that the city take whatever steps are necessary to halt any further work at the property located at 233 North Market, and prohibit Haven of Hope or any other entity from operating a men's homeless shelter until such time as City Council develops guidelines for both the permissible locations and the operation of homeless shelters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Anybody else? There's extra people in the audience. Ma'am, state your name and your address, please.
Lisa Egler, 146 East Sycamore. I live 10 feet from the building. My single driveway separates us. I just want it to be known that the city of Wert needs to seriously consider this homeless shelter in the place that it is. On social media, which is public, a Cleveland resident of a homeless shelter reached out to Haven of Hope this week and is wanting to transfer here. After reading that, I went to the gentleman's page, and he has spent 25 years in prison. He is a Tier 3 sex offender, which is the worst sex offender that he has to register for the rest of his entire life. He has been homeless for 8 years, and he has lived in a homeless shelter for 8 years. From my little investigation, he previously lived in the Ohio City area and is wanting to come back this way. But this is what we're looking at. You know, I understand that there are homeless people by loss of jobs or whatever, but if he can't find a job in Cleveland in 8 years, that's a lot bigger city than Wert. And a lot of these factories in Wert don't hire felons, nor our biggest factory has laid off permanently 100+ people, and they're not done yet. So with opening this homeless shelter, we're going to be bringing in people from other places. I mean, the word's already out. We have somebody from Cleveland wanting to come here. And it's like, we have to have some guidelines. It has to be zoned. I mean, I don't want somebody 10 feet from my door that was a rapist. I'm sorry. I mean, yes, they could buy a house and move in, but I would get my little postcard in the mail. These people are going to be coming and going every night. I'm not going to get a postcard, and by the time I do, they're going to be gone.
Okay.
I'm not going to know.
Time's up, ma'am. Anybody else?
My name is Ashley Valiant. I'm the one that wrote you guys the letter because I wasn't able to attend the last
Sure.
meeting. But I pretty much agree with everything that they are stating. Like I said in my letter, that I worked at homeless shelters and stuff, grew up in the Orlando area. They could not get volunteers for the men's shelters. And just pretty much like Lisa just said, once you have a smaller basis, if it's a one-on-one more functionality type situation, you're going to have those other cities coming. Yes, we have sex offenders on Market Street, but like she said, we know where they're at. We don't know who's coming night and day, and we have young children. And why should they be their play life or whatever be interrupted by that when we're already having to put so many strict restrictions on them? We just want them to have a childhood.
Any other comments, communications? From council?
What do we think's going on with, since they're not doing anything, they obviously can't move forward, can they?
Well, I'll tell you what I think's going on. I would imagine that Haven of Hopes has gotten legal counsel, and their legal counsel, and this is all speculation, I don't know this, but their legal counsel has likely told them that that facility qualifies for B3, which is what administration said on day one. So I would imagine their legal counsel saying, I would start and put it in the court of the residents to, and that would be my suggestion, is seek your own legal counsel and, go ahead.
How can they literally defy a resolution of council?
John, can anyone give us a date of the last meeting of the zoning? They don't meet.
Last meeting, what's the question, Ken?
When was the most recent meeting for the zoning board?
Oh, that was about 3 weeks ago. It was prior to the last council meeting.
So they haven't had one since? Yeah.
No.
Well, because it could be something even less confrontational, unless there's anyone here that can speak for the zoning or Haven. It could be zoning jumped the gun on that first letter, thinking they were gonna have an appeal, then found out Haven wasn't appealing because they were gonna submit a request.
That's not the case. There's a 14-day notice requirement, so the notice had to go out to the people 14 days ahead of the meeting. That was the urgency of
They
getting.
did file.
And they filed, and we did the notice, and then had to rescind it because they came in last week and withdrew. Haven of Hope did.
So it's correct, they did say they were going to appeal?
Yes,
But
they
they had
filed
not-
for an appeal.
Appeal what? The zoning hadn't met on their behalf.
Well, maybe appeal's not the right word. They made.
Here's what,
Well, that's what
my
I'm-
interpretation is,
You have the letter.
Yeah, I think maybe that word was
They're
wrong.
appealing
no,
council's decision.
well, it's a zoning board of
See,
appeals.
council doesn't make a decision.
Well, they're
The
appealing,
the zoning board makes the decision.
they were appealing the resolution that was passed at
To go there.
2 meetings ago.
They
That's
were,
what they're
yeah,
appealing.
they were appealing us overriding administration.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's what it said in the letter.
So perhaps a different way of wording it was, they were asking zoning to give them a variance. I know it didn't say that. I'm saying perhaps that's what it should have said.
It could have said also concurring with the administration's decision. It could have gone either way. Because where else would it fit within the zoning?
I checked with either Bill or,
My suggestion is to seek advice from legal counsel. That's my suggestion. Yes.
May I say? And that's a great recommendation, and yes, we should. But here we are in our little neighborhood that's already struggling. We didn't invite Haven of Hope in, we don't want Haven of Hope there. They are bringing in an element that we don't have now, and we don't need. My question is, why is the onus on us to keep them out, and why is the onus not on council to make them, to require them to proceed according to protocol and get the variance and give us an opportunity to say what we need to say, to ask the questions we need to ask. It seems to me that Haven of Hope is trying to do an end run around everybody, open up their shelter without reaching out to the neighborhood, without any kind of sanction, and introducing an element of danger to our neighborhood that was not there before. I'm shut down.
Sure.
And Andy personally told me when I flat out asked him, Andy, you have 7 kids, and there was a Redeemer Church pastor there. I said, would you guys want this in your backyard? He stood at an awkward silence, he was, be my witness, and did not answer me. And I looked right at him and I said, well, you're not gonna lie to me, you're a deacon, you're a pastor. Again, he did not say anything. So him, being who he is, the golden rule, he should follow it. He wouldn't want it in his backyard on an urban road, and I doubt that his neighbors would want it there either, and neither do we.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a comment, because
Sure, Mr. Mayor.
I just don't, I think the whole sequence got mixed up. When he came with the bill, with the permit to do what he was doing, we looked at the statute, the code, the zoning for that, and we determined that it fit within that B3.
Before or after he bought it?
But it doesn't matter. We looked, I don't know whether he bought before or after, honestly. I don't know that. I don't know. We looked at it when he came in for the request to put it in that area. And it seemed to fit that best. So he was given permission to go ahead with it. Then when he came in here with you folks on the other side of the coin, it went to council, and council said, go to zoning board. But the zoning board really could support the position of administration, because there's no other definitive place to put that.
That's really all we ever wanted, because
But
Then
council meeting isn't the appropriate place to debate with another organization whether they're qualified or not. That's zoning board.
Sure.
That's really what we want.
And
But see, there was, excuse me, John, but there was no need for him to go to the zoning board. Council
Well, council
stepped.
told him to.
Yeah, well, why? Because they didn't think it fit into that area.
Well, who's got the authority here?
Well, I mean, that's the question, Chris. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you what I know about
Well, it
this whole
seems to me if
situation.
council passes a resolution that you're gonna do this, you're gonna do it. I mean, that's, otherwise council has no authority.
And when does the city step in and say, okay, we don't have a homeless shelter in Van Wert, so now we need zoning, we need guidelines, we need ordinances. Just like when they wanted to put the adult thing in the video store, just, yeah, you guys tried to take that. I mean, people were complaining about that because there wasn't any in Van Wert. What was the other thing? There was another thing that the city,
There are all kinds of guidelines on a swimming pool.
yeah, swimming pools in your yard,
Got
fences.
no guidelines on homeless shelters.
None, 0 on homeless shelters, but by gosh, you can't put a pool in your yard unless you meet all these or a fence. I mean, to me, it just seems ridiculous that the city isn't gonna make any point in this. You're gonna just bring in people from all over. I mean, this town is lacking restaurants, it's lacking industry, and you're gonna bring a homeless shelter in, it's just gonna make it worse.
Have you discussed this with the law director?
have I?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I can't speak for him, but when I talked to him last week, he said he thought the city had several options. One's do nothing, which it sounds like that's where you're coming from. He thought the city could get an injunction now, get an injunction after they open, or again, do nothing, and I guess that's where council stands on this, and I don't think that's.
But I don't know that, personally, I can't speak for council,
Okay.
because I run the meetings, I don't have a vote.
Well, it seems to me that the whole thing, I'm personal friends with the law director, I think the whole thing's gonna end up in his lap before anybody does anything.
I think
That
you're right.
sounds reasonable?
That's basically what I said last time. That ultimately it's gonna come back here, which it has, and ultimately it's gonna be decided in the court.
And if, excuse me, but if the court looks at the situation, they're gonna see if council followed the proper procedure. And a proper procedure for him to come in here and get a building permit was followed. Except now we jump forward, we throw it over to the zoning board. That may not be the proper procedure. I don't know.
Question.
Sure.
If I'm a neighbor and I don't think it belongs in my neighborhood,
Yes.
can I appeal to the zoning board?
Absolutely.
So they can appeal to the zoning board, and then they have to have a meeting,
Right.
correct? And then
Absolutely.
they have a chance to voice their opinions and let everything be heard without, I mean, I'm not seeing that they need to get an attorney, that just doesn't even seem right. But if they can appeal to the zoning board,
And we're appealing.
Anybody can appeal to the zoning board.
What are we appealing?
What
But
would
there's
be
nothing
appealing?
presented to the zoning board at this time by, who are they appealing, what are they appealing for?
They're appealing for a decision on whether the administration made the right determination on that
But
particular zoning.
that's what council told Haven Hope to do, and they didn't do it.
Yeah. You're missing one step though, Chris.
Well,
The
they
zoning
should
board
have,
has to be.
this should have started at zoning, not at council.
but I think we need to get away to get it to zoning. And
Which
if-
is, which
Yeah,
is,
I think you need to appeal to the zoning board and see what happens, I guess, but.
Right.
So does that go through council or the mayor's office?
goes through the zoning board.
Goes
You just
straight to
send a
the
letter-
zoning board.
Send a letter to Bill, we'll get it, he'll get it on the zoning board.
So we write the letter to the zoning board?
No,
or to the
well, you
mayor's
would
office?
write it to Bill Lawson,
Okay,
he'll arrange that for you.
we'll do that.
My fear, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping in here, but I'm gonna do it. My fear is that Haven of Hope will continue on, and they're planning on opening up in February. They have no policies in place, they have no security in place. If we confuse, if the issue is further confused, more delays, they open in February. And from all intents and purposes, observation, there are people in there working, they're advertising for volunteers. They are going to open in February, and we have no protection.
Well, this point that Lisa brought up about somebody from Cleveland wanting to be transferred here, I find that greatly concerning because the fact that they're only open from 7 PM to 8 AM. So if this homeless person from Cleveland, who sounds like a fine upstanding citizen, is transferred to this homeless shelter, where's he going during the day? We don't have any place for him to go during the day, so I don't understand it.
But Martha, we're jumping the gun there too. because
No, I know.
We don't
We have
know
to-
that they're going to pass muster with the Haven Hope people either.
No, I know that, but it just, if those types of situations, I don't understand
agree.
where these people are going during the day anyway. And the fact that when Andy McMahon was here and they talked about being hooked up with, what, Love Inc. or something. So it sounds to me like people can call and say, do you have an empty bed? Well, yes, we do. So they're gonna bring in somebody who's homeless in another community to let them be homeless in our community. I don't get it. I mean, I just think there's a lot of concerns, not only for this neighborhood, but for the community as a whole.
And then they're lined up out front on the sidewalk where my kids are trying to play, waiting for the doors to unlock.
Jeff?
It was my intent, when I brought that up, that this should have all went, to me, it should have went to the zoning board from the very beginning. And so it was my intent that when we overrid this, that it went to the, because, you know, they're the ones going to ask the questions. Now, my concern is just what she said, they're down there getting this thing ready to open, and that shouldn't be allowed. In my opinion, we've got to stop them from, they ain't going through due process. How are we letting them? We haven't, as far as I'm concerned, council hasn't okayed it. How are we gonna let them down there to, there's gotta be a way for us to stop that, in my opinion.
Well, as it is right now, they haven't done anything illegal. They got a building permit, they're allowed to work on the building. Until they put homeless people in there, I don't know that there's anything we can do.
For example, if they got a permit to put in a new furnace, they can do that. You can't stop that work.
No, because they're planning on opening up something that, so if they come up here and ask for, what they've done is come up here and ask for that, we can open up, and we told them no. You gotta go to the zoning board and pass that, and then you can. So, no, we're not saying, we didn't give them permission to put in a furnace or put in a light.
No, but you said telling them stop work.
That's right.
You can't stop that
Well,
work.
sure we can.
Well,
They are soliciting.
Or they're wasting their money.
Well, it's not a homeless
then-
shelter yet.
And they can waste their money if they want. That's not your job to stop them from wasting money. I can say I'm gonna open up a car wash at my house and I need to install some new plumbing. And I can waste all that money because I'm not gonna be able to open a car wash.
Yeah, you're not following what I'm saying. I know we can't stop them from wasting their money. Well, we can stop them from putting money.
You
Alright.
can't stop them from
Alright,
putting in new lights.
Alright, I think the easiest,
Can I, this
Go ahead.
needs to go to the zoning board. 150.6 says we've appointed a zoning inspector. We'll take the fall here of being the zoning inspector as the administration. We made a ruling, they don't like it. Their next step is to appeal. The decision of the zoning inspector shall be made to the Board of Appeals, provided 150.65. Make your appeal. We have the
Okay.
meeting, you all get to voice your concern. We're bringing up to say, if it's not meant to
I
happen,
appreciate that. We were told by the law director and then the mayor that the next step was to go to council.
I think the law director, and I shouldn't speak for him either, but there's a procedural issue that has to happen. That, I believe it needs to go this route, then when it ends up in the court, the judge isn't throwing it all back to the
Yep.
beginning because it never went to the zoning board.
I think the easiest way to get what you guys want
Okay.
is to
well,
appeal
that's
to
fine.
the zoning board.
But I don't think we have any cease or desist. John would have to answer that at this point because it's not a shelter
So what
yet.
happens to the council resolution? They told them to go to zoning. They can't just ignore it, can they?
I don't think that was an appropriate move on council's part. I think that's the whole issue.
I think that's the premise under
I
which
think-
they're going ahead.
Yeah.
I agree with what Martha said.
That action was outside this book, so I don't know how to comment on it.
But it's gonna come right back here anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably.
Regardless of what the zoning board says,
Yeah.
it's gonna come right back to council anyway. It's my understanding. Once the zoning board of appeals makes a decision, the next step, if you don't like it, you come back to council.
Correct.
That would go to court.
No, it goes
Council-
council first.
Council.
Council has to approve.
It's
It's
joint
council and then
council,
court,
then
right?
court, yeah.
Decision, is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
And if you don't follow the right steps, it'll be thrown out of court. So
okay.
you
that's
guys
fine.
need to appeal. It'll probably end up at council and then probably end up in court.
Okay,
Okay, thank you. I think we're,
all right. Any other comments, communications on any other subjects? Administrative reports, Mayor, Mr. Jerry Mazer.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is my last kick at the can. And it's, I want to tell you, it's been a pleasure serving the people of Van Wert. Tried to do everything in my power to make it a better place to live, and I think we made some strides in that area. I appreciate the work the council, both councils that I worked with, supported the efforts we were doing with economic development and the garbage pickup and all those other little things. Economic development, I will tell you, has exceeded all expectations as far as Jobs Ohio and Regional Growth Partners are concerned, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that labor in a positive way with, as Stacy would point out, we have about, if you reference dollars against jobs, we probably have 100 extra jobs in town. Some of that money was overtime, of course, but we do have new employees in town. But it's been indeed a pleasure for me to serve as your mayor, and I wish Ken all the best in the future and look forward to Van Wert continuing on the route of success. I really do believe that we're heading in the right direction. Thank you.
Any questions for the mayor? Council? Public? Thank you, Jerry. Safety Service Director, Mr. Jay Fleming.
Mr. President, I don't have any report, except I'd like to thank the outgoing council people for their service. It's been a pleasure serving under you guys for the last couple of years, and I certainly appreciate and thank Jerry for his efforts as mayor, and enjoyed working for him. And want everybody to have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Any questions for the Safety Service Director? From council? From the public? Thank you, Jay. Auditor, Mrs. Martha Valiant.
I have several things for this evening. First thing is the November 30th bank reconciliation, which, since this is almost a month old, it really doesn't mean a whole lot, but I didn't report it at the first of the month. Nothing really totally out of the ordinary. We have not collected income tax at the level we thought we were going to for 2019. Nothing real serious that's going to throw us into a big downspin, but income tax revenues did not increase at the rate we thought they were going to. And I talked to the tax administrator just in the last couple of weeks doing our projections for next year, because we have to send everything to the county at the end of the year. She's projecting no increase for next year over what we have collected in 2019, just because of the trend that we've been seeing, which is not real good news. It's not totally devastating, but it's not exactly what we wanted to hear. We did finally get our final settlement from the county on our real estate taxes today. We got the last of that. We're assuming we got everything that's owed us. So we're going to end the year on a positive note. Not quite as positive as what we'd hoped, but. So if anybody has any questions, I gave you all copies of the bank reconciliation. Any questions on any of that? We'll have a whole new report in a couple of weeks for the end of the year. So like I said, this doesn't really tell anything too great. The other thing that is up for tonight is you're going to be voting on the temporary budget for 2020. There were a few changes from the first draft that was passed out. I was unable to produce a report out of my new software that showed what we originally had in the first draft, what the change was, and what the new number is, due to the way I input the information, which I know now not to do it the way I did it. But I can tell you the changes that were made were due to hospitalization, because we've had open enrollment. We know where people are going to be as far as what coverage, and we have our new rates. So in the draft budget, we put no increase for hospitalization or for wages, because the bargaining units are all going to be negotiating in the first couple months of 2020. So fringe benefits did change in every department. I had an error in the street department that Jay caught. I think I put something in at 3 million that should have been 300,000, which I did correct that from the draft. But other than that, there's no big changes. Steve had asked a question about Fund 201, which is the street maintenance fund. The salaries are quite a bit higher in that fund. And that's because the 201, the street department is funded by Fund 201 and 301. 301 is the .50 street income tax. There's never enough money in the 201 to fund the wages and operating expenses. So we've always split it depending on how much money was in the 201. Sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 40-60. But with the increase in gasoline tax that we saw in 2019, we believe that the Fund 201 will now be able to support all those wages 100%. So that's why the wages in the 201 fund are quite a bit higher than what they were previously. So any other questions on the budget? This is a temporary budget. We'll have to have a permanent budget in place by April 1st.
I know we had a drop in income because the fines weren't as much do we anticipate that changing for next year?
In what now?
The fines, is it because the weigh station was closed?
Oh, that's municipal court, I have no idea.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, the last thing that the law director had said was the weigh station was open again, and, you know, what that means, I don't know.
It's possible that'll be a little better than it was
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah, and the court doesn't really make any projections on their revenue because they feel that if they make a projection, it's like they've set a goal.
Yeah, I
So,
understand.
yeah, so we kind of just guess at what the revenue's gonna be there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. There's a supplemental appropriation that, Ken, you'll need to ask to be approved, which it's already been prepared, if you want to take a look at it. Maybe. Which is ordinance 19-12-079. Most of these are just small amounts, which are fringe benefits due to pension payments. Ohio Public Employees pension, they changed a year ago or 2 years ago. We pay that on an estimate, and then you do what they call a true-up. So because of that, we never know where we are with our PRS. So we have a lot of fringe benefit adjustments because what we had estimated, we ended up paying a little bit more. The big reduction, starting with Fund 210, Fund 210, 11, 12, 13, 14 are municipal court funds. And the way they do their budget, if you appropriate more funds than what you've actually received, even though you've not spent them, but if you've appropriated them in your budget, at the end of the year, you have to reduce your budget down to the amount that you actually received. So that's what all those are in 210, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Those are all reductions in their appropriation because we did not receive what we thought we were going to in those funds. In Fund 220, that's our .22 money that the 1/3 of it that we use to fund police and fire salaries. And what we had projected and what we collected a little bit more than what we had projected, so I just needed to increase those appropriations. On your copy in Fund 250, which is Ohio Public Works money, it shows an increase of $300,000. That should actually be a decrease of $300,000. And the law director is aware of that and will make that change when he prints it. We have a grant from Ohio Public Works, which we're not able to bid in 2019, so that money was not encumbered, so that's in the budget for next year, but we do have to reduce the appropriation. Fund 502 is the town center TIF, and the TIF did not collect as much money as it was estimated to collect, so we had to reduce that. Fund 850 and 851 are police and fire pension funds, and we did not receive what we had budgeted, which I'm hoping those numbers are right. We got money yet today from the county, which I hope these are the final numbers. So we just had to adjust what was appropriated for those funds. Woodland Cemetery is the same thing, that's real estate taxes. We had to adjust that. The State Patrol Rotary Fund is money that comes from the municipal court and then is paid to the county law library, and that's the same situation. We appropriated more than what we actually received, so we had to reduce that. So this needs to be asked to be prepared and then passed as an emergency so that I can get my books adjusted for the end of the year. Any questions on that? Okay, the only other thing that I want to call to your attention is the law director prepared Resolution 19-12-074. This is to approve the rates for health insurance. And in Section 3, he has HRA 13%, which that really should read HSA 13% of total premium. And Mr. Hatcher's been aware of that, and he'll change that in the final copy.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Should say HSA.
HSA, yeah. And that is all I have.
Michael,
Yes.
what about this then and now?
Oh, good call, Ken. I buried it. That's why I didn't do it. I have an invoice that needs to be approved on a then and now. The invoice is to Wiseman Designs, $20,000. It's a retainer for the with the municipal court for work they're having done. And is that all I have now, Ken?
Well, I don't know. 78, was that just sent over from municipal?
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, you don't have a 78?
Well, I have it, but I don't know where it came from.
70, so here's what happened with 78, and we'll need to run that through. Since we have not passed we are not planning on passing a salary ordinance before the end of the year because our unionized employees, we're gonna negotiate right off the bat in 2020. The municipal court asked that we pass their salary ordinance now because they're not under the idea, they don't have to negotiate anything. So that's why we see a salary ordinance that's specifically related to municipal court. That's what 078 is.
Which has not been prepared.
It has not been, no, it's not, you'll have to ask for that to be prepared and then take it all the way through.
I have no more questions.
Any other questions for the auditor? Thank you, Martha. Mr. Hatcher is not here, so we'll move on to committee reports. Health Service and Safety, Mr. Bill Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a short report tonight. I just want to address to council that I'm looking at my final sheet for the year. And as you know, I've been on this committee for 24 months. And when we looked at these reports starting in my first year, it was incredible the number of code violations that we had. And we've worked and worked and worked and we've whittled it down. This is the cleanest report that I have seen in the 24 months that I've been here, which says to me that we're doing some right things. Our code violation people are working very diligently. We're getting help from our law director through the courts, and I think people are starting to pay attention to the fact that we're looking at these things that are going on in our community. Are we finished? No. There's still more work to do, and I'll be addressing that in the new year as I continue to chair this committee. I have some ideas that I'll be bringing before council, and that's all I have to report. If anybody has any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Marshall? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Economic Development, Mr. Warren Straley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening.
Any questions for Economic Development? Thank you, Warren. Parks and Recreation, Mr. Joel Penton.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to apologize, everybody, for being late. I ran into a little traffic problem in Fort Wayne that I didn't anticipate. I guess I should have. But anyway, everything's going fine with the Parks Department.
All right.
No problems, and that's all.
All right. Any questions for Parks and Recreation?
It's not really a question for him, but it's something I should have brought up. There is a piece of legislation, Ken, you didn't catch this one. It's 19-12-076. We, earlier in the year, advanced $75,000 from the general fund to the Parks Fund 302 because they had grants that they had to spend the money first to get reimbursed. So we have been reimbursed for that $75,000, and we need to pay it back to the general fund. So Mr. Hatcher prepared ordinance 19-12-076, so if Ken can ask for that to be prepared, it's advancing $75,000 out of Fund 302 back into 101, the general fund.
And that's Ken's fault?
No, that's my fault, but he was checking up on me, so.
I thought maybe you were gonna give it to Parks.
Oh, well, it says finance.
It says finance on it.
Yeah.
I know.
All right. Any questions
You want that
for
going?
Joel?
You want that to go through tonight?
It needs to, yeah, we need to pay it back by the end of the year.
Okay, property and equipment, Mr. Jeff Egler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening.
Any questions for Mr. Egler? Thank you, Jeff. Judiciary and annexation, Joy is not here. Warren, you are vice chair. Did she give you a report?
She did not.
Okay. Any questions for judiciary and annexation? Thank you. Finance, here we go, Mr. Ken Markwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we approve the then and now to Wiseman Design LLC invoice number RR-MC 2019-10226 in the amount of $20,000.
Okay, motion to approve the then and now. Second by Mr. Trittschuh. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Thank you. And as Martha mentioned, I move that an ordinance be prepared to advance $75,000 out of Fund 302 back into Fund 101 on an emergency basis.
Okay, motion to prepare an ordinance to move funds from 302 to 101 and declaring an emergency. Second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. Ordinance number 19-12-076 has been prepared. I move that it be introduced.
Motion to introduce. Second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. Since this was prepared on emergency basis, I move we suspend the rules.
Motion to suspend. Second by Mr. Egler.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. With rules suspended, I move that we approve this ordinance on its first and final reading.
Okay, motion to approve 19-12-076 on first and final. Second by Mr. Egler. Please read the ordinance and call the roll.
Ordinance number 19-12-076, an ordinance to advance funds from Fund 302 to Fund 101 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. I move that an ordinance be prepared for the municipal court salary as described by Mr. Thomas on an emergency basis.
Okay. Motion to prepare an ordinance for the salaries and compensation for municipal court employees on an emergency basis. Second by Mr. Egler.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. Ordinance number 19-12-078 has been prepared. I move that it be introduced.
Motion to introduce 19-12-078. Second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. Next, I move that we suspend the rules.
Motion to suspend the rules on 78. Second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Oh. Mr. Right? I'm sorry, Mr. Egler?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuh?
Yes. And I move that 19-12-078 be approved on its first and final reading.
Motion to approve 19-12-078 on first and final. Second by Mr. Egler. Please read the ordinance and call the roll.
Ordinance number 19-12-078, an ordinance providing for the salaries and compensation of employees in the municipal court system for the Van Wert Municipal Court, establishing job classifications, salary ranges, and limitations, authorizing specific number of employees, providing for sick leave, vacation, schedule, allowances, immunization against communicable diseases and other benefits, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
I move that we prepare an ordinance for supplemental appropriation to the various funds as the auditor described earlier on an emergency basis.
Okay, motion to prepare on an emergency basis.
Yeah.
Second by Mr. Iegler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
Ordinance number 19-12-079 has been prepared. I move it be introduced.
Motion to introduce. Second by Mr. Iegler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
I move the rules be suspended for this ordinance.
Motion to suspend rules on 079, second by Mr. Iegler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
I move this ordinance be approved on its first and final reading.
Okay, motion to approve on first and final, second by Mr. Iegler.
Yep.
Please read the ordinance and call the roll.
Ordinance number 19-12-079, an ordinance to make supplemental appropriation to funds 101, 210, 211, 212, 213, 214, 220, 230, 301, 502, 550, 601, 701, 850, 851, 875, 876, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
The only other thing I have is just to note that there are two more things on the consent agenda and one more at the end of the agenda.
Yes.
And that's all I have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Markward? Thank you, Ken. Streets and alleys, Mr. Steve Trittier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to say it's been a pleasure to serve with everyone the last 6 years, and good luck to the new administration and new council members. That's all I have.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions for streets and alleys? Thank you. Unfinished business, obviously, we heard from code enforcement, or any new business to come before council this evening? Hearing none, move to the consent agenda. There are 3 resolutions on the consent agenda. Okay, I need a motion to introduce the consent agenda.
So move.
Question,
Yes.
is this plat on the consent agenda?
No, no.
Should be.
Yeah, it is, yes.
I have a question about that.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
077.
Was that asked for at the last meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
You probably missed this, can I ask a question now?
Absolutely.
On the zoning and setbacks, it says that the rear is 30 feet. Did they get like a difference, because it says it's supposed to be 35?
It's part of that planned unit development.
No, that's what I thought, I probably missed that, that's all, I just.
Anybody, so anytime, just a reminder with the consent agenda, anybody can pull, all you need is a motion to pull something off the consent agenda. So even though it's there, it doesn't have to be. Okay with it? Okay. All right, I have a motion to introduce the consent agenda from Mr. Iegler. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Straley. Please call the roll.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
Okay, motion to suspend the rules for the consent agenda.
Yep.
Mr. Iegler first, second by Mr. Straley. Please call the roll.
Mr. Iegler?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittier?
Yes.
Okay, now I need a motion to approve the consent agenda on first and final. Mr. Iegler, second by Mr. Straley. Please read all 3 and then call the roll.
Yep. Resolution number 19-12-074, a resolution approving the rates for employee contribution and employers' participation in the City of Van Wert Healthcare Program and Health Savings Account, HSA program, effective on January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Amend resolution 19-01-002 and declaring an emergency. Resolution number 19-12-075, a resolution to ratify the amend resolution 19-02-010 to the fee for check not honored policy to allow for charge of $15 for any electronic payment from a fund that is returned, $20 for any chargeback, and ratifying the city's return check fee of $25 and declaring an emergency. Resolution number 19-12-077, a resolution accepting the final plat for the landing at Dickinson Farms Phase 1A and amending Phase 1 in the City of Van Wert and declaring an emergency. Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Markworth?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
All right, moving on to resolutions and ordinances. This one's you.
Yeah. I'll just read it.
Read it, yeah.
Resolutions and ordinances. Ordinance number 19-11-073, an ordinance to amend the Van Wert City Code of Ordinances 96.01 of the Van Wert City Code of Ordinances. This is the second reading. Resolution number,
Nope.
oh,
That one has to be voted on by
oh,
itself.
okay. Can I just go down?
Yep.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
Mr. Markwood.
I move that resolution 19-12-071 be approved on its third and final reading.
Okay, motion to approve on third and final, second by Mr. Straley. Remember, this is the temporary budget. Please read the resolution and call the roll.
Resolution number 19-12-071, an ordinance to make temporary appropriations for the annual expenses and other expenditures for the City of Van Wert, Ohio from January 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2020, and declaring an emergency. This is the third and final reading.
Yep.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
All right, before we adjourn, I have we asked the law director to prepare resolutions to honor, recognize Jerry Mazer, the outgoing mayor, Steve Trittschuo, and Warren Straley for their service to the city of Van Wert. So I need a motion to, and I'm gonna break the rules here since I don't need to do these all three individually. But I'm gonna ask for a motion to introduce or to prepare resolutions, those three resolutions.
Make that motion.
Mr. Egler, second by Mr. Markward. Please call the roll.
Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
Okay, the law director has prepared resolutions 19-12-080, resolution 19-12-081, and resolution 19-12-082. I need a motion to introduce. Mr. Markward, second by Mr. Egler. Please call the roll.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
I also need a motion to suspend the rules. Mr. Egler, Mr. Markward on suspending the rules.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Aker?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Trittschuo?
Yes.
And finally, a motion to pass on first and final. Mr. Egler, Mr. Markward. And I'm going to read these myself.
Sure. Mr. Igler was first, right?
Doesn't matter.
Mr. Igler?
Yes.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Churchman?
Yes.
All right. Okay, resolution number 19-12-080, a special resolution to recognize Gerald T. Mazer for his service to the city of Van Wert, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Resolution number 19-12-081, a special resolution to recognize Steve Tritchie for his service to the city of Van Wert, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. And finally, resolution number 19-12-082, a special resolution to recognize Warren Straley for his service to the city of Van Wert, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Anything else to come before council this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, we're in limbo here.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Igler?
Yes.
Mr. Tritchie?
Yes.
All right, now, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Tritchie, second by Mr. Straley.
Aw.
Apropos.
She probably abstained.
All right. Mr. Tritchie?
Yes.
Mr. Straley?
Yes.
Mr. Markward?
Yes.
Mr. Penton?
Yes.
Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Igler?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good night.